Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the AORUS CO49DQ 49-inch ultrawide OLED monitor, which is the first super ultrawide OLED I've reviewed, and I gotta say, this thing does not disappoint. I'll be following the same outline as all of my other reviews, starting with the specs and panel settings first, before shifting into some test results, and then covering what I like, potentially don't like, and the gray area before wrapping the video up. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The AORUS CO49DQ is a 49-inch ultrawide OLED monitor with a 5120 by 1440p resolution, an 1800R curve, a 144Hz refresh rate, a 0.03 millisecond response time, and more of a glossy anti-glare coating for the screen. This covers 99% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, has a typical brightness of 250 nits, and a peak brightness of 1000 nits in a 3% window. This has a contrast ratio of 1.5 million to 1. This has true 10-bit color, and is certified VESA HDR 400. This is also VESA certified Clear MR 8000, which I hadn't heard of before, so I'm going to bring up an image explaining this a little bit more. This launched about 2 years ago. Hadn't heard of it because I haven't had any monitors that have actually utilized this yet, so this is the first one. But let's go ahead and break this down a little bit. So the big thing here is this is going to be a new metric replacing the old metrics, and it's going to provide a clear numerical value based on the ratio of clear pixels to blurry pixels. So this is going to enable consumers to more easily compare the amount of motion blur between VESA certified Clear MR displays. This replaces the motion picture response time and other methods of blur characterization, since those metrics don't accurately reflect the true nature of blur. And a little bit more here, it's basically saying that the MPRT is failing to reflect the true nature of blur because it's solely a time-based metric. So this can't account for a number of image enhancement and blur mitigation techniques, such as excessive overshoot and undershoot, which can create artifacts and distortions that negatively impact image quality. And something they don't mention here is that a lot of companies use black frame insertion with MPRT so that they can speed this up. So essentially in between a frame, they put a black frame, and that just makes it seem like this is a 1 millisecond motion picture response time, for example. And so with this new metric, VESA is hoping that consumers can make a fair comparison of motion blur quality across different products, which is awesome. I like that they're doing this, especially when we are looking at these OLEDs, which are so fast. Now this has multiple performance tiers. So with this, I'm going to show another diagram here in a second, but just to explain this goes from Clear MR 3000 up to Clear MR 9000. These actually represent a range of blur performance based on the ratio of clear pixels versus blurry pixels as a percentage. Clear MR 7000, for example, is defined as a CMR range of 65 to 75 times 6500 to 7500% more clear pixels than blurry pixels. They say each tier provides a visually distinguishable change in clarity, with higher CMR numbers indicating higher image quality and less blur. Only displays that pass all Clear MR compliance tests can qualify for the VESA certified Clear MR logo, which this has. Looking at this image from VESA, this is going to give a breakdown here of the different levels that you have. This monitor is Clear MR 8000, so this has 75 to 85% more clear pixels than blurry pixels. So this is at the higher end of what you can get when it comes to this Clear MR rating. And although I didn't know about this certification until this video, one, I like the fact that they have gotten this. We've had this third-party tested, and that we have a new testing metric versus the old stuff that we can use with these very high-end OLED panels. That being said, I would expect that these would probably be towards the higher end in general, just because of the individual pixels being backlit. Overall, OLEDs just have more clarity to them than some of the older panels when we're looking at an IPS or a VA panel. But again, I like the fact that they've had this tested, and we do know this has more clear pixels than blurry pixels because of this certification process. For ports, this has two HDMI 2.1, one DP 1.4, one USB-C that can be used as a video input and has 18 watts of power delivery, and then this has two USB 3.0 ports and a headphone jack. For physical adjustments, this has a height adjustment of 130 millimeters. This can swivel to the left or the right 30 degrees, and this can tilt 5 degrees forwards and 20 degrees backwards. This is also VESA mountable with a 100mm by 100mm pattern. This has two 5-watt speakers, which I usually do a sound test for speakers, but a couple different things here. One, this gets very loud, so I'm not going to be able to actually showcase this in a good way just based off of that. But this also has different modes to it. It has a regular mode and it has a surround sound mode, and it also has 4 different presets. So there's just a lot to try to cover there, and I don't think it's really going to translate to what this actually sounds like in person. So I feel like I'm just going to do this a disservice. So I'm not going to showcase that. What I will say, it is very, very good with the speakers here. Next, we have everything that you get inside of the box. So we get the power cable, HDMI cable, DP cable, USB extension cable, calibration testing report, which I always like to see that, and then a warranty card. Speaking of the warranty, Gigabyte offers a 3-year warranty on all of their OLED monitors, which I'm really happy to see that we're getting this type of coverage across the board with all these different companies when it comes to these OLEDs, because I know OLED burn-in is a big concern for a lot of people, but you are covered here for 3 years. Next, I have the price. I normally actually talk about that potentially at the very end. I want to talk about it now. This is normally $1,100. I was able to get this for $1,000, but as of the writing of this script, it's actually down to $900, which is mind-blowing for just what you're getting here. I always base these reviews off of the price, so do keep that in mind as we get into the portion where I'm talking about what I like, don't like, potentially the gray area stuff. I'm judging it off of what you can get this at, and this bests a lot of other OLED monitors with similar specs out on the market by anywhere from like $200 to $500. So just something to keep in mind as I do progress through the rest of this review. Shifting now into the panel menu. The menu button is a single button on the bottom middle of the panel, which I love over multiple buttons. Bringing this up, you have a 5-option cross with exit sitting right in the center. And then you have settings on the top, OLED care on the left, game assist on the right, and power off on the bottom. We're gonna start with the settings tab first, and then we're gonna come back and cover the rest. With this though, if you wanted to just use this as a quick access menu, you don't click it in, you just actually push in a direction. You can change this in the settings. I'll showcase that in a little bit, but you do have a quick menu option as well here. So there's almost like 2 menus running on top of each other. It's just how you push the button or don't push the button with how this is going to operate. Clicking on the settings, you have 6 tabs: gaming, picture, display, picture-in-picture / picture-by-picture, system, and reset all. On the top of the menu, you have a quick outline of some of the settings you have currently applied within the gaming and picture tabs, which is a nice touch, but it only applies to those 2 tabs. On the gaming tab, you have black equalizer, super resolution, display mode, and FreeSync Premium Pro. The black equalizer has 20 levels to it, super resolution has 4 levels to it, and this increases the sharpness of the monitor, and display mode allows you to toggle this between full and aspect ratio. For the picture tab, you have 2 different versions, one when in SDR and one when in HDR. I'm going to cover SDR first, which, starting this off, you have your presets. Here we have standard, FPS, MOBA, RPG, racing, movie, reader, sRGB, custom, and eco. What I really love about this panel is they give you a solid amount of adjustment options for each of these presets, and the layout here is laid out really well, making it easy to navigate because usually all of these things are spread across multiple tabs. Here, it's all in one place. on each preset, you can adjust brightness, contrast, color vibrance, sharpness, gamma, color temperature, and color space. The 6-axis control is only available in the custom preset, where you can adjust hue and saturation of the RGB CMY colors. The sRGB preset only allows you to adjust brightness. All the other ones though, you have all of those different adjustments to work with. Shifting back over to the presets, I've kept this in the RPG preset for most of this video as I think it looks the best, but all of these presets are very distinct, which is great. Sometimes you get panels, they actually almost all kind of look identical. Here, vastly different between all of these presets. This does make it hard to actually showcase all of this though, so I'm going to stick in the RPG preset to showcase the various settings moving forward, starting with the color temperature, which this has cool, natural, normal, warm, and user defined, which allows you to adjust the RGB colors from 0 to 100%. The footage in this video is on normal. After that, you have the color space, which has native, Adobe, and DCI P3. The footage in this video is using native color space. Now let's shift over to HDR in Windows, which is how you'll actually enable it for this panel, as there's no option in the panel settings to turn this on or off. Once that's turned on, the picture settings shift over to HDR settings. Here you have 5 total presets: HDR, HDR Game, HDR Movie, HDR HLG, and HDR Vivid. HDR and HDR HLG don't allow you to adjust anything, but the Game, Movie, and Vivid presets do, which includes brightness, contrast, light enhance, color enhance, and dark enhance. Brightness and contrast are on a scale from 0 to 100. Light and color enhance have 3 levels to them, and dark enhance is either on or off. For this video, the footage I'm showcasing is using HDR Vivid with brightness at 100%, contrast at 65, light enhance at 0, color enhance at 2, and dark enhance on. The normal HDR mode here is pretty dark, so brightness at 100 seems to bring this up to SDR levels of brightness, which is why I have it set at that. The HDR HLG mode stands for Hybrid Log Gamma, which is a hybrid format that enables the output of HDR that's similar to HDR10 and the Dolby Vision format. Next, you have the Display tab, which has Input, KVM, RGB range, and Apply Picture mode. The only thing that I want to cover here is the KVM tab, more specifically the KVM wizard, where you're going to be able to dictate what the KVM switch is running off of. Are we going off of the regular USB ports or the Type-C port? If you're using the Type-C port, for instance, as a video input, you obviously want to use the Type-B to run any peripherals off of. That way you can control it across multiple devices here. I always like when monitors include a KVM switch. It is a very nice thing to have. Next, we have the picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture tab. A lot of things to cover here. I think that's going to be a draw, obviously, with a super ultra-wide. Starting with the picture-in-picture, you have source, USB control, picture-in-picture size, which there are 3 that I will showcase in a second, location, display switch, and audio switch. Before I showcase the picture-in-picture size and location, I want to talk about the display switch and audio switch. Display switch, this is actually just taking whatever is on the main source here. In my instance, it would be my PC. It swaps it out for whatever is in the smaller picture-in-picture window, and I will have the PlayStation 5 running with this. You essentially just swap those 2 inputs out. Audio switch, whichever input is going to be the main audio coming out of the monitor. Could be the smaller window, could be the main portion on the window, you get to dictate that. Shifting over now to the size, you have small, medium, and large. Couldn't figure out how to change the aspect ratio here, so it is in that ultra wide aspect ratio, which isn't great for consoles. Keep that in mind. For the placement, you have upper left hand side, upper right hand side, bottom left hand side, and bottom right hand side. Shifting over now to picture by picture, you have source, USB control, picture by picture mode, and last display switch and audio switch, which are going to be utilized the same way that they are for picture in picture mode. Next, I want to showcase the mode itself with the PlayStation 5 and my PC and talk about some of the limitations here. So one of the draws for a super ultra wide is the fact that it is essentially two 27-inch monitors stacked next to each other without the seam in the middle. But when you do that, you do have a tendency to lose certain things that if this wasn't split by picture mode, you would have on the regular monitor. In this instance, both of these can actually be 4K. They can be 1440p or 4K, which is awesome, but they cannot be 144 Hertz or 120 Hertz. They can only be 60 Hertz, which is what I'm showcasing in the NVIDIA control panel. Now, confirming with the PlayStation 5, you can have this with the 4K resolution. I was just in 4K resolution with my PC. A downside there is the text looks really bad. It looks better in 1440p. You're also going to lose FreeSync or G-Sync compatibility mode. On the PlayStation 5, you're going to lose variable refresh rate. So here you end up kind of getting boxed into 4K 1440p at basically 60 Hertz, which if you need the higher resolution, you're not going to be able to do that. Kind of a bummer. All of those same things apply to the picture-in-picture mode as well, so you end up getting locked into that 60 Hertz. Keep that in mind. Now, if you're okay with 60 Hertz and you're playing on a console, I still think with this, it looks visually very good. I don't tell a difference between 4K and 1440p when it comes to consoles. I do on PC. One of the bigger downsides there again being the fact that text just doesn't look really good. That is not something that is showing up on consoles. I don't notice the massive change in text or anything like that. It just looks a little bit more crisp overall when it comes to 4K resolution over 1440p, but it is very minimal. If you have a game that has different modes, balance versus resolution versus performance, we're looking at Horizon Forbidden West here. So if I switch over from favor resolution to favor performance, there is a very noticeable difference between those modes on this. Again, we're still locked into the 60 Hertz. I'm not getting any variable refresh rate, so it can't go higher than that. But the action still looks way smoother when we change over to that other mode. So when I hop back, you should notice just the animations overall way smoother than they were a second ago. I don't know how much of that is going to translate to the video here, but in person, there's a very noticeable difference. One last thing I do want to mention, no HDR across the board if you're going to do picture in picture or picture by picture. Now, let's say we just have a console and we want to play on this super ultra wide. It's not something that I would recommend because it stretches the image, but let's look at that and can we adjust this to the regular 16:9 aspect ratio. So here we have the full stretched out image. Doesn't look very good. If the game has it where you do have a point of view slider or field of view slider, maybe you could make this look a lot better, but if it doesn't, it's just way stretched out. I also notice a lot more artifacting when it's stretched out like this. Now, some good news is if you do change the display from full to aspect, you will actually shrink this down to the 16:9 aspect ratio. And with that, we're going to have everything looking normal again here. I did notice more bloom, but I didn't actually adjust any of the HDR settings with this. Good news is you do have the ability to use HDR as well as variable refresh rate. So that's what we're seeing here with the refresh rate kind of jumping between the 50s and 60s. Or you could actually just shoot this all the way up to hit the 120 Hertz if you want. So you have more options. We have 4K, 1440p, variable refresh rate with this, and HDR. But we're looking at these massive black bars on the side. It's just something that, again, I wouldn't want the stretched image. I don't know that I want this in this mode either necessarily. I know that's going to be just based off every individual and whether or not they're okay with that. But If you're just going to be using consoles, definitely don't ever get an ultra wide or especially a super ultra wide. It's not really geared towards those. Shifting back to our panel settings though, we have the system tab. Here you have language, audio, audio mode, OSD settings, quick switch, and other settings. For audio, you have that surround sound mode that I talked about earlier. You also have volume and mute. Volume is set to 50% by default, so keep that in mind. Once you get this, you can crank this all the way up to take full advantage of how loud these truly get. For the audio modes, you have standard, gaming, FPS, and movie. Standard and FPS kind of seem like they just boost treble, while gaming and movie seem like they boost bass. For the other settings, you have resolution notice, input auto switch, auto power off, LED indicator, Type-C compatibility, HDMI version, HDMI CEC, and USB A or C charging. The only thing I really want to cover here is the quick switch. I mentioned this earlier on. If you just push the menu dial in a direction, you don't click it in, you get that quick access to whatever setting you set. So up, down, right, or left, you can see on the right hand side, that's where you choose whatever that's going to be. Shifting back now to the various options I said, if you click that menu button in, let's go over to OLED Care. With this, you have standard and advanced. Standard really doesn't show anything. Really, advanced is where you unlock everything. But looking at the listing for the monitor, when it talks about OLED Care, it's saying that AORUS is using an AI-based algorithm to minimize the risk of burn-in. Here, if you click on learn more, it takes you to download the user manual. You download that. There's not anything more detailed that it showcases in the user manual. So I'm assuming that with standard here, it's just using whatever AI technology that they have built into this to minimize that risk. If you go into advanced, you have more control over this. Looking at the user manual though, let's cover all the things that you have options for when it comes to the OLED Care. Care Plus, integrate OLED Care settings for optimal protection or select to customize your own, like I just said. Usage time shows accumulated screen usage time. Pixel clean, when the monitor is being used for 4 hours, it's recommended that you actually start that process to clean and refresh the pixel compensation on the screen. Static control reduces screen brightness when the image remains static. Pixel shift moves the screen content by pixels to prevent static image retention. APL adjusts the screen brightness to stabilize average picture level. And last, we have sub logo dim, reduce the brightness of the taskbar and static logos to prevent image retention. In general, if you have an OLED, I actually have it so the taskbar goes away. I don't leave any icons on my screen outside of the recycle icon that I can't get rid of. And then I have a tendency to, over the course of a couple weeks, change the background to a different image. So that was the OLED Care tab. That is if you click to the left. If you click to the right, you go over to Game Assist. We have Game Info, Crosshair, Dashboard, Display Alignment. Game Info, Gaming Timer, Gaming Counter, Refresh Rate, Info Location. I'm not going to cover really any of this stuff or the crosshair. I do want to showcase what is in the dashboard though, because this is a feature I do like. Here, you get to choose all of those options. I don't even showcase everything, but just some examples. Frame rate, CPU temperature, frequency, fan speed, usage, everything that you may find in an app like MSI Afterburner, for example, is here built in. Very nice touch. You get to move this around. You can change what is actually shown or not shown here. Very nice thing to have if you don't want to use an app that's just integrated now into the monitor. Next, I just want to quickly cover the sidekick in the Gigabyte Control Center. This allows you to control a lot of what you find in the panel menu off of your PC itself. Instead of adjusting it through there, you have this option. It's nice to have. You don't have every single option that you find in the panel menu, but you do find a lot of them here. We have 4 different tabs: General Settings, Display Settings, App Info, and Gaming Assist. Here in the general settings, we have source selection, LED indicator. This is for your power light indicator. Quick switch, if we want to change any of the quick access menus off of the menu button itself on the panel, you can adjust that here. And then we have the on-screen display that you can adjust these settings directly from this as well, but that is only applied to obviously the on-screen display, so the panel menu itself. Next, we have the display setting. We have our picture modes here, so all of your different presets. You will not find HDR here. So if I enable HDR and then I come in here and I actually change this over to one of the other presets, it's almost like it's switching it back into SDR and then running the picture preset. If I have the panel menu up and then I adjust it to a different preset for HDR, it's almost like it switches it back. Kind of odd setup there. I'm surprised they don't actually have the HDR settings here, but they don't. Here you will find brightness, contrast, sharpness, black equalizer, color vibrance, low blue light, super resolution. All of these are on sliders that you can adjust. They've kind of combined some of the menus into one right here, which makes it easy to actually navigate. Then we have gamma, overdrive. You're not going to have overdrive because it's an OLED. Then we have color temperature. Here you're actually missing user defined. You can only find that in the panel menu itself. Then we have FreeSync and local dimming. It's an OLED. It has infinite black levels. Each of the pixels are backlit. There is no local dimming because every pixel being backlit, essentially you have all of those enabled for local dimming. Then we have app info. Here, you can actually essentially change the picture mode based off of the application that you have brought up. So if you're using Photoshop and you need a particular preset, you can have this so once you open up that application, it will automatically switch over. Last, we have gaming assist. Here, you're just going to find everything like you would in the menu for counters. Show me refresh rate. I actually need the crosshair on. All those different settings are right here, along with hotkeys if you want to enable them. One last thing to mention is that you will not find the different color space presets in the display settings tab either. So with this, we do find a lot of settings here. Some things are missing, but as long as you're not needing to adjust those too often, like the color space, for example, this presents a very easy way to make adjustments that are just faster than going through the panel menu itself. Having HDR missing from this is a bit of a bummer, but hopefully through a software update, we get that added in down the road. So that is all the settings that I wanted to cover. I know that was a lot, but hopefully that gives you a good insight into everything that this monitor has to offer when it comes to the menu and the settings that you have here. Shifting over now to the on-screen response time tester. This is where we're looking at the response time and is it that 0.03 milliseconds. Now ultimately I don't see that this is 0.03 milliseconds, but I'm also running into some issues when it comes to the testing tool and the adaptive brightness limiter that we find on OLEDs, and especially these ultra wide OLEDs. So this is impacting performance perceived by the tool here. This is super fast. I think it has to do more with that feature than actually the true performance of this panel. So here, when we're looking at the top of perceived response time, when we're seeing 6.8, 7.3, 7.4, to me it has more to do with that feature and isn't a true representation of how fast this monitor actually is. What we see in the middle, to me, is more of a true representation of the speed here, which is all sub 1 milliseconds. Best that we have here is 0.6. The worst is the 7.4, but again, that's an effect of that adaptive brightness limiter. We're seeing our average here about 1 milliseconds, but honestly, I think this is probably sub 1 millisecond. Is it 0.03? I don't know if it's quite there, but my guess is it's at least under 1 millisecond. When we look at RGB overshoot, this is basically 0 across the board, because if I'm looking at those top numbers, that really has to do with the adaptive brightness limiter, which is also a consequence of that as we are getting some overshoot. Visual response rating, I mean, across the board, this is just hitting the high mark outside of the ones where we're seeing the adaptive brightness limiter coming into play. A more important thing to look at here though is visually, do I notice any ghosting, or does anybody notice any ghosting? If you're running the UFO test, you're not going to see any with your eye. What you're going to see is just this very smooth UFO going across the screen. No ghosting to visually see here. Confirmed by the tests where we're seeing essentially sub 1 millisecond response time with no overshoots. When we get overshoot, that's where we see ghosting and inverse ghosting. We're not going to have those issues here. Very fast panel, but we're dealing with an OLED, and across the board, all OLEDs are very fast, and I can confirm through the on-screen response time testing tool and just visually looking at the UFO test that this follows suit with all those other OLEDs as being extremely fast. Shifting over now to the Spider X color calibration tool from Datacolor, basically just confirming, is this 99% of the DCI-P3 color space? Based off this graph right here, it is, but I do want to define this because sometimes you have companies that are using color gamut versus color space, and it can kind of get confusing. Sometimes I use those words intermingled when I shouldn't. It's just something that's like a bad habit that I have, but here, let's define it. Color space is a mathematical model that defines how colors are represented using numbers, while color gamut is the range of colors that a device or system can display, reproduce, or capture. Color gamut is a subset of colors within a color space. So if you remember back to the panel settings, you have 3 different color spaces you can shift this into. Here, this is in standard. So in standard, we cover 100% of the sRGB color space. Keeping in mind also the limitation of this device, it can't go above 100. Sometimes you'll see some where they're like, hey, this monitor covers 125% of the sRGB color space. I can't confirm that with this device. What I can say is that it is at least 100%, but here we get 100% of the sRGB, 97% of the Adobe RGB, 99% of the DCI-P3, and 94% of the NTSC. What's interesting is when we shift over to the DCI-P3 preset, the sRGB actually goes down to 97%. Adobe RGB goes down to 84%. We're getting DCI-P3 down to 93%, and then 83% for the NTSC. So a reduction with all of these when we shift over to the DCI-P3 preset. Now this is a 6% reduction in color space here. I'm surprised by that. I would have figured in that mode we would have seen it cap out at 100%, but we are not seeing that. Again, overall, we're seeing everything actually just reduce in this mode. And the same can be said when we shift over to the Adobe preset. sRGB is dropping down to 97%, Adobe is dropping down to 90%, DCI-P3 is dropping down to 93%, and NTSC is dropping down to 89%. So an overall reduction in this mode as well. This is one of the reasons why I like to actually test and see with these different modes, because here I'm finding the standard mode is going to be the best in terms of color space across the board. So now that I've covered the specs, the panel menu, the tests, let's get into what I like about this monitor. And I want to start and lead with the fact that you're either going to like a super ultra wide in general or not. That's usually the two camps here. There's kind of not an in between. And usually what I found is that when people see one of these for the first time in person, their first reaction is, holy smokes, that thing is huge. Because in person, it's just a lot of screen real estate. And with that large screen real estate, the appeal, especially for content creators, is you have this massive spread that you get to use for your workspace. For gamers, when you have that super ultra wide aspect ratio and you're sitting just in the right sweet spot, it kind of feels like you're wearing a VR headset, just because this is filling some of your peripheral view space. But something to keep in mind is, do you have the hardware to truly take advantage of what this is offering? I'm running a 3080 Ti. It handles this pretty well. You're going to want to make sure that you're most likely using a 3000 series plus. I would say probably a 3080 and above, and you get into like a 4000 series, but just make sure you have the hardware to truly take advantage of this. Otherwise, when you're dealing with games, if you're going to be playing this and you can only hit 30 FPS in most AAA games, when you're dealing with this aspect ratio and resolution, you're probably going to feel pretty disappointed with this. Now, if you do have the hardware, if you do want a super ultra wide, this is an incredible monitor. I would put this towards the top of my list for OLEDs that I've tested and reviewed. Handful of things with this. Number one, I'm judging this off of the price. I mentioned that earlier. With this price, it is extremely affordable compared to a lot of other monitors that are out on the market right now. Now, It doesn't hit, for example, the 240 hertz that you see with some other super ultra wides out there. But keeping in mind what I was just talking about, do you even have hardware that can take advantage of that? Are you fully going to utilize the 240 hertz? Probably not at this size. Now, that is future proofing, and I understand that, but we're going to see a lot of other products coming out over the next couple years. I think people are like, yeah, I'll use this for the next 3-4 years, but ultimately they end up getting a new monitor in a couple years because they want the latest and greatest. So I'm not too hung up on, hey, I need this to be 240 hertz. I think the 144 hertz here is a very good sweet spot. What I'm seeing is that in order to hit this particular price point, they kind of got rid of a lot of the different frills with this. So we're not seeing RGB lighting on this. With this, we're not hitting that 240 hertz. They took away some of these things in order to hit this very, very good price point. But that price point wouldn't matter if they didn't deliver on the performance side, and they do in a very big way. Performance across the board with this monitor is very, very good. We have the super fast response time with this OLED panel. We're looking at the 144 hertz that I said was a very good sweet spot. All the customization that you get with this in the panel itself, I like seeing that. You have a huge amount of control when it comes to this, not only for SDR, but for HDR as well. We're getting very good color space with this. Visually, it just looks incredible in person. I like the semi-gloss finish that they have here because you get the increase in vibrancy of the colors while still not getting a huge amount of reflections. This will reflect some, but it's not as much as with other panels where it goes with a very high glossy finish when it comes to the panel. Now I've made sure to label all of the games. I'm just showcasing gaming on this right now so you guys get to see as much variability when it comes to this. The appeal of OLEDs when it comes to infinite blacks is obviously going to be here. So if you do play darker games, it is really, really good with that. Like I mentioned, the HDR or the SDR is really good, but HDR in particular, I like the amount of customization that they give you here. That's not always the case when it comes to monitors. Sometimes they just basically box you into certain things. Here we have more control, which I think is a very good thing. Solid speakers here as well. They get really loud. Again, I didn't do the test because they get so loud, but you also get a good amount of customization when it comes to those speakers. And I do like the surround sound mode. It just visually you hear the difference between it basically being in the center of the monitor to actually moving out further on the monitor to create more of a surround sound feel. We also have the KVM switch. I like when monitors include that. Here you get to use this with the USB Type-C or the USB Type A or B. Here you can change that in the menu, more customization features there. And I also like the fact that you can use the USB Type-C for a display input. So if you have a handheld, you get to utilize that handheld on this monitor. The only thing there is you have to keep in mind the limitation of the handheld. So I am going to showcase me playing just dead cells on the ROG Ally. Some things to note here is that I'm using the USB Type-C for the input, and then I'm also running the KVM switch. So I'm using the keyboard and mouse that I actually have tied to the monitor that I usually use on my PC with this device as well. So I can switch between using this on the ROG Ally or another device and my PC. Here, some interesting things when you're running this. I notice it's trying to mimic the handheld. So when I initially boot up the game, it actually just puts those big black bars on the side, shrinks it down to the 16:9 aspect ratio when I extend the display from the ROG Ally to this. If I say duplicate, it's interesting because it takes that 16:9 aspect ratio and it actually stretches it out. But the main point here is to actually showcase footage of me utilizing the USB Type-C as a display input and also taking advantage of the KVM switch with the regular USB ports. The picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture features, that is a main draw for super ultra wides. If you're using a console, having picture-by-picture here, where it's essentially being utilized on a 27-inch screen, very nice. But if you're only primarily console gaming, I would never get a super ultra wide or really an ultra wide in general, because those don't natively display in those larger aspect ratios. If you do have this and you're going to be using PC with it, it is nice to split this in half and hey, I'm going to console game for a little bit. Maybe you're watching a tutorial on the game or YouTube where you have something else. Like I showcased myself, I was working on this video actually on one side, but then I wanted to game for a second. So very nice there. Picture in picture. I wish you had a little bit more control in terms of the aspect ratio there and being able to scale that a little bit more. But if same thing, I'm on PC, I want to watch a tutorial on something, I can have that in the upper corner while I'm actually playing the game, or maybe it's a tutorial for Adobe Premiere Pro. There are draws to that and it really fits with this super ultra wide. Next, I like the OLED care, and more specifically the control that you have when you switch over to the advanced tab and how this is going to take care of this and make sure that you don't get burn-in. Another good thing here, last thing to cover, is the 3-year warranty, because that does give you a good peace of mind when it comes to this. Now that is becoming more of a standard with OLEDs across the board. I like seeing that, and again, just some peace of mind when it comes to this, because this is a lot of money, and to make that investment and then have this have burn-in in a year is obviously something that we don't want. And AORUS was able to offer the 3-year warranty here even though they have this lower price. I know MSI got in trouble earlier this year. They were originally going to launch an OLED monitor, no warranty. That's how they brought the cost down. Everybody freaked out. They're like, that's not okay with us. And so they ended up backtracking and adding a warranty to that product. Shifting over now to the negatives, I only have one thing, very good sign, but there's no cable management like hook on the back of the panel. So when you're running your cables through the opening on the stand, they just loosely hang there. The reason they're just hanging down is because the inputs are way over on the sides. So you have all this loose cable hanging down, but no way to actually prop it up. This would have been alleviated if there was just a hook on the back of the panel to actually just put these up and over and hold them in place. I thought about just finding some type of cable management hook that you put on your desk that I could put on the back of here. My only concern is, will it hold long term? It'll probably fall, and then I don't want to actually have any of that sticky tack or tape or anything like that just stuck on the back of the panel here. It should have been built in, and I'm not quite sure why it made it all the way through development with these hanging down on the sides here without somebody mentioning this. But the good news is that is literally the only negative I've been able to find with this monitor. Shifting over now to the gray area, which are things you may or may not care about. I actually only have one thing here too, and I tried like nitpicking this thing and writing a list, and it's just between the price and just how much this delivers, I really couldn't find anything. The only thing here in terms of a gray area thing is the fact that the USB Type-C only does 18 watts charging for the output. If it was 60 or 90, you could have actually charged a handheld device or your laptop. You can't do that here. Now you could charge something like a phone, but you're not going to be able to charge those larger devices. But this is bringing us back to this conversation of they were taking this and trying to bring it in at a certain price point. Certain things most likely were there, they got cut. If you're going to have that higher watt charging, if it can't be built into the panel itself, you're going to have that large external brick to deliver more power. Obviously, that's just going to increase the overall cost, so it wouldn't have been quite as affordable. So looking at certain things, I understand why they brought this in at a lower watt output. So if you do need that higher watt charging, it's not here. I don't think that's a deal breaker, but just something to keep in mind. Last couple things I want to cover. Text clarity here is decent. This has basically 109 pixels per inch, so pretty solid. It'd be similar to 32-inch 1440p monitor. I'm not noticing any type of weird bending or anything like that towards the edge of the monitor. Keep it in mind though, this curve isn't as pronounced as like a 1000R curve. So overall, I think it looks pretty decent. You may want to run clear type to maybe slightly improve it. I was trying to find the subpixel layout for this, but I couldn't actually find what version this was. The only thing I did find was the fact that it is based off of a Samsung QD OLED panel. Outside of that, I just don't know the subpixel layout. My assumption is, looking at them trying to bring down costs, this may be last year's version just repackaged, which this just brings down the cost. It makes it so we're getting to a more affordable place. I know this is very expensive, but a more affordable place for people where we're not in that like $1,300 to $1,800 price range. We're getting this now at $1,000 or under. So that is going to wrap this video up. In conclusion, they delivered so much value here. I know this is expensive. Again, this isn't a cheap monitor, but when you're looking at the landscape, this is one of the cheaper OLEDs across the board, let alone the fact that it's the super ultra wide here. But you're getting the incredible OLED visuals, those infinite blacks, the colors that are super vibrant. You're getting the super fast response time. All of this plus all the extras when we're looking at the KVM switch, the solid speakers, and the peace of mind with the 3-year warranty and solid OLED care. So if you're interested in a super ultra wide monitor, I think this is one of the best ones out there right now to get. Now, of course, I haven't reviewed every single super ultra wide that is out there or a lot of the new OLEDs that have come out, but this still on paper and from what I've tested stands out amongst all the ones that I have looked at and the other ones that I've looked at just really on paper where I'm looking at specs and hey, what's the next review that I want to do. This ends up having a really solid placement towards the top of my list when it comes to OLEDs and super ultra wide monitors and just in general monitors that I've reviewed. So that's going to wrap this video up. I tried to hopefully cover as many potential questions that anybody may have on this monitor, but if you do have some that I didn't cover, let me know in the comment section. If you want to pick this up and try and get it at that $8.99, because I don't know how long that's going to stick around, I will have a link for this in the description if you want to do that. And if you like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, like any of my other upcoming reviews for various monitors, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.